All right, everyone, we have an interesting geopolitical situation which can be analyzed multiple ways. DPRK troops have entered Russia. It appears that North Korea is now directly involved with the struggle in Ukraine. You can analyze this several ways. Number one, Vladimir is getting more cozy with the North Koreans. This could show a switch within the Eastern Bloc, too. Russia and China are really the socio-political dipole of BRICS and associated sort of movements in the East Bloc. China and Russia are fair-weathered friends. They both want to dominate one another. This has been a problem for them throughout the Cold War. A lot of people don't realize that there were so many proxy conflicts in Southeast Asia. We talk about like the United States' involvement in Vietnam. China invaded Vietnam on two different occasions. The Russians and the Chinese squabbled for decades over proper communist doctrine. You had the Soviet model, which changes more over time, and then the Chinese model of the Great Leap Forward sort of thing, and then the stabilization with the Gang of Four and all of those things that happen. You have the Vietnamese and the Cambodian government, Pol Pot, attacking each other. The United States of blot on our history actually recognizing Pol Pot as a legitimate leader there and sort of taking a hands-off approach and low-key rooting for him over the Vietnamese. In retrospect, that probably wasn't the greatest diplomatic idea. The Russians and the Chinese, therefore, squabble with one another behind the scenes. There was a moment, for instance, a little more than a decade ago. I remember reporting on it at the time. I think it was 2012 or thereabouts. And the Russians were striking up a gas deal with the Chinese. And they laid the pipeline out. And then when it came to finalization, the final terms, Putin went to Beijing. And he left early, because the Chinese decided, no, at the last minute, once the infrastructure is already there, so Russia has already invested all of this money, we're not going to pay you so much as you wanted for the gas. And Putin left in a hurry, in a huff, and it sort of chilled relations between the two nations for a while. They managed to do a rapprochement. I analyze this as North Korea swinging more towards Russia and away from Chinese hegemony. Normally, China uses them as a buffer state to shore up that part of its border, for the purposes of preventing any incursions through northern China. It looks, though, as though they're swinging off towards Russia now, and stabilizing relations more with them. That's number one. The number two takeaway is there would be no real reason to invite North Korean troops into your country to presumptively fight in Ukraine if you didn't have a manpower problem. As this war drags on, Ukraine and Russia are both suffering heavy losses on all fronts. While Russia clearly has the upper hand, they have, air support and things like that Ukraine really doesn't have. They have a functional navy and so forth. While Russia has the upper hand, they have been ground down almost to a halt in multiple fronts. In Ukraine, of course, the attack on Kiev that never materialized was obviously a feint in order to push further into the eastern side of the country. That was probably the best strategy that Putin could employ. Having those troops there, therefore, even though it's a relatively limited number, when you're buying munitions from a much smaller country, and now you're grabbing troops from them, it doesn't necessarily speak to your ability to fully pledge yourself to that war machine with any semblance of an expectation of a total victory. It shows more of a holding pattern sort of thing. I think it's to force negotiations more than anything else. I would say if I was a North Korean soldier, I would be absolutely happy to sign up for such a venture. North Korea's standard of living, and like the supplies and shit that they give the troops, although their training is quite rigorous, it is not on par with what you get in a relatively more developed military context. Like Russia, Vatnik memes aside and stuff like that, has a relatively standardized military force. They have the toys that make the noise, the same as other advanced countries do in the military sense. But the standards that they have for their troops, while that would be looked at by maybe soldiers in the US or Britain or something as being lower quality, to North Koreans it must be like living in the Ritz. It must be spectacular for them, actually. So I would definitely sign up. Oh, I get to actually take part in a fighting war, and I'll get extra rations? Man, I can get Russian MREs? Holy shit, this is gourmet. I have a feeling that there were a lot more people that wanted to sign up than were actually sent in the first place. Just a theory of mine, I would say. So now there is a battalion of North Korean troops there headed towards Ukraine. There'll probably be more of them. This almost looks like it could be a mistake, though, when you think about it. Because if they enter Ukraine, North Korea and Russia are relatively different in the geopolitical context as they relate to NATO. So if North Korean troops are operating in one particular area and they get targeted, anything can and does happen. This is why we need Trump back. Trump managed to generally smooth over relations with North Korea. Was it perfect? No. Was it better than the current situation or the situation that evolved before that? Yes. There was an attempt to thaw things out with North Korea under Clinton, which backfired in a most spectacular fashion when they said, oh, well, now we've got a nuclear reactor. Well, we can refine nuclear material and make atom bombs. Clinton gave them that ability, by the way. It was Bill Clinton that effectively gave North Korea the bomb. Donald Trump, realizing that tenuous situation, is the first president to step foot into North Korea, got the border loudspeakers taken out, remains repatriated, landmines cleaned up, border stations destroyed, a general thawing of relations, and then he stood back and he said, okay, well, it's your Korea, it's not our Korea. We're the guarantor of the ROK's safety, but ultimately you two have to hash things out. And they did, as long as Trump was president. Second he leaves, all of a sudden, Kim Jong-un says, oh, we're going to start firing missiles again and doing more drills. Put that artillery back on the border, build more border posts, because peace through strength actually works. Speak softly, go into North Korea, shake Kim Jong-un's hand and everything, salute the soldiers. That was considered to be wrong by liberal commentators. I would note that if Obama had done something similar, you'd be praising him as a peacemaker. In Dick Cheney's case, it would be as a pacemaker. Pun intended. Okay, I'm making dad jokes now. Never mind. But then things unthawed the second that he left. There was no lasting peace. If we get him back, hopefully we can cement it further. Say, look, we want to leave you alone. We're not interested in fighting you and don't even fucking understand. Most Americans alive today were not alive during the Korean War. Let's conduct normal diplomacy. And apparently there are trades involved with North Korea with farm equipment at the moment, actually. Because their equipment mainly dates to the 1950s and 60s, and I'm assuming breaks down on a regular basis. Maybe not the most efficient methodology to farming your bok choy. I'm sure North Korean cuisine is a sight to behold. I wish one of those defectors would write like a North Korean cookbook or something like that. Here's your mulch smoothie and this moss is edible sometimes. We can make this lichen into a soup. It's actually, it doesn't taste half bad. You get your ration of salt and sprinkle a few pinches in there and it's like a mushroom soup kind of, or something like that. So DPRK troops in Russia, it is worrisome. And it shouldn't be happening and probably wouldn't be. If the war hadn't existed, this wouldn't be happening. And the war wouldn't exist if we had sane leadership in D.C. Ultimately, it's the fault of the feckless Biden-Harris regime that this is happening. When we show weakness, bad things happen. That's about all. Peace out.